his attempt. Kennedy left Palm Beach December 12th, but was scheduled to return on December 16th and remain there through Christmas. When Kennedy was away, the Secret Service began tracking Pavlik. When Pavlik visited the local post office to collect any forwarded mail, 2 Secret Service agents were behind the counter. Pavlik was arrested on a technical charge of crossing a white center strip. Pavlik was taken into custody and made no effort to deny that he intended to kill President Kennedy. He was found incompetent to stand trial and incarcerated in a federal mental institution and later to a New Hampshire hospital, from which he was released on December 13, 1966, having never stood trial. Pavlik died in 1972. Hey everyone, Scott here. We're going to take a very short break for a word from our sponsors. Well, JFK received hundreds of threatening letters during his presidency, including more than a few from men serving time in prison psychiatric wards. JFK was also subject to the attentions of repeat offenders. An Italian-born man was arrested in 1962 after he had written a letter to the president that read, in part, "I wish to advise that if the President of the United States resists my commands, I will bash his brains in alive." He had previously been sentenced for sending a threatening letter and obscene telegram to President Truman in 1946. The patient said he was only trying to indicate to the president that if he had the power to remove the president's brain, he would give him a different brain so he could understand how it feels when people do not have enough money to clothe and feed themselves properly. Like all presidents, Kennedy was targeted by groups and individuals who were angered at him. Like all presidents, Kennedy was targeted by groups and individuals who were angered at his foreign and domestic policies. In early April 1961, a few weeks before the Bay of Pigs fiasco, the Secret Service investigated a murder and kidnapping case by a pro-Castro Cuban group in the United States. Agents received reports that the group had been plotting to either kidnap or kill Kennedy, his wife Jacqueline, and their 2 children, John and Caroline. The agency tracked down 4 suspects in the Palm Beach area and JFK's winter home and kept the group under surveillance. No arrests were made, however, perhaps because publicity over the case scared off the plotters. 6 months before President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, he became very close to being shot in Nashville, Tennessee. According to the Nashville Banner, during a visit to a local high school in May 1963, the president was approached by a man with a gun underneath a sack. The man was tackled by agents and led away. The newspaper source alleged that the incident was hushed up because the Secret Service feared copycat attacks. Foreign travel didn't offer Kennedy reprieve from assassination threats. Ahead of a June 1963 trip to Ireland, police were alerted to 2 telephone messages alleging the president would be assassinated during his trip. The threats turned out to be false, but extra security precautions were taken. Secret Service agents were allowed to carry sidearms, even though it was against the law for foreign security personnel to be armed. It's been alleged that the plotters arranged Kennedy's assassination during a presidential visit to Chicago 4 weeks before his death in Dallas, and that the presidential visit was canceled because of the plot. In the late 1970s, a former Chicago Secret Service agent, Abraham Bolden, told the House Select Committee on Assassinations, or the HSCA, that the FBI sent a message to the Chicago Secret Service office stating that there would be an attempt on Kennedy's life in Chicago on November 2nd by a 4-man hit team using high-powered rifles. When Kennedy's Chicago trip was canceled, Bolden claimed, the assassination plans were then adapted to Dallas, and Oswald became the designated assassin. The HSCA looked into Bolden's allegations and concluded that his story was of questionable authenticity. The HSCA also investigated the alleged Chicago plot, but it was unable to document the existence of the alleged assassination team, the report noted. Specifically, no agent who had been assigned to Chicago confirmed any of Bolden's version. Specifically, no agent who had been assigned to Chicago confirmed any aspect of Bolden's version. The HSCA said that one agent did state there had been a threat in Chicago during that period, but he was unable to recall details. Former Secret Service agent Gerald Blaine also debunked Bolden's allegations by checking Secret Service files and discovering pages and pages of information that refuted all the claims Bolden was making. He also confirmed the president's trip had not been canceled because of the alleged plot. The trip was canceled, Blaine said, because of a coup in Vietnam when the Diem brothers were assassinated. There was a threat originating in Chicago, but it was far removed from Bolton's invented scenarios. On October 30th, 2 days before the president was due to visit Chicago, the Secret Service learned that Thomas Arthur Valle had allegedly become a threat to the president. Valle was a 62-year-old Marine Corps veteran and John Birch Society member with a history of mental illness who lived in Chicago and was outspokenly opposed to JFK's foreign policy. He also claimed to be an expert marksman. Valle's landlady had found a collage of the president and local politicians made from newspaper clippings that was taped to the wall of his room. Threatening remarks accompanied the photos. She tipped off the local police, who forwarded the information to the Chicago office of the Secret Service. Agents went to Valle's apartment while he was at work. The next day, the landlady phoned the Secret Service and told agents Valle was planning to take a day off work the same day Kennedy was due in Chicago. The next day, Valle was stopped by police for a minor traffic violation, and when officers searched his car, they arrested him for carrying a concealed weapon and a legal hunting knife. When they searched his apartment, they found an M1 rifle and 2,500 rounds of ammunition. Valle was arrested but released from custody on November 2nd. 3 threats were made against the president ahead of his 5-hour visit to Tampa, Florida on November 18, 1963. The first threatener was Wayne Gainey, who was under psychiatric care in Tampa, Florida as an outpatient. In October 1963, the Secret Service discovered he had claimed the Ku Klux Klan had authorized him to kill the president. Agents interviewed his parents, and they gave assurances that their son would be in their care during the president's visit to Tampa. As an extra precaution, an agent kept the house under surveillance. The second threatener was John William Warrington, a 53-year-old Tampa man who said he would be lying in ambush when the president visited Florida. He wanted to kill Kennedy because of the president's association with Martin Luther King Jr. Warrington had been diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and had been in and out of mental hospitals for the previous 15 years. He had a long history of writing threatening letters and making verbal threats to the president, and had written threatening letters to President Kennedy, postmarked October 15th, 16th, and 17th in Tampa. He was arrested on October 18th and was held in the city jail. The third threatener was Joseph Miltier, a right-wing activist who lived in Quitman, Georgia. He told a police informant that Kennedy was going to be assassinated, but nothing came of the threats. One day before JFK's Dallas trip, the Secret Service investigated a threat made by a 21-year-old Dallas man, Russell McClary. McClary worked at a firm located 3 blocks from the Dallas Trade Mart, where President Kennedy was due to give a speech following his motorcade through downtown Dallas the next day. McClary told 2 women that he would be waiting with a gun to shoot JFK when the president reached the Trade Mart. Described by his father as a nice kid who shoots his mouth off too much sometimes, McClary was arrested after Kennedy was assassinated. Secret Service agents reported him as saying he was glad that Kennedy had died. Appearing in court, McClary insisted his comment was a joke. A federal grand jury believed him, and jurors refused to indict McClary on a charge of threatening the president. President Kennedy was assassinated during his Dallas trip when Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots from a 6th-floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. John David Reddy had been part of Kennedy's Secret Service detail that day and was assigned to the right front running board of the presidential follow-up car. Reddy, whose job was to observe the crowd and buildings, said, "I heard what appeared to be firecrackers going off from my position." The vast majority of ear witnesses heard 3 shots, and many of them believed they were firecrackers. Following Kennedy's assassination, the Secret Service came under severe criticism for its failure to protect the president. The HSCA determined that the Secret Service was deficient in the performance of its duties, and that it possessed information that was not properly analyzed, investigated, or used by the Secret Service in connection with the president's trip to Dallas. The report further found that the Secret Service agents in the motorcade were inadequately prepared to protect the president from a sniper. Although the HSCA believed that the agents' conduct was without firm direction and evidence a lack of preparedness, they did conclude that many agents reacted in a positive, protective manner. The committee praised Agent Clint Hill, who was in the presidential follow-up car, for having reacted almost instantaneously when the shots rang out in the Dealey Plaza. It also singled out Agent Lem Johns, who left Vice President Johnson's follow-up car in an effort to reach the vice president's limousine for praise. The committee also noted that other agents were beginning to react approximately 1.6 seconds after the first shot. But if agents had been standing on the right rear step, they would have blocked Oswald's sight on Kennedy. Arguably, blame for the poor protection afforded the president can be shared. According to author Ronald Kessler, who interviewed a number of agents who had been on Kennedy's detail, JFK's recklessness eventually contributed to his death. Despite warnings of violence in Dallas, Kessler wrote, he refused to let Secret Service agents ride on the rear running board of his limousine in the motorcade on November 22, 1963. Since the kill shot to the president's head came 4.9 seconds after the first shot that hit him, Secret Service agents would have had a chance to protect him. Kessler cited Secret Service Director Louis Merletti, who confirmed the theory. An analysis of the ensuing assassination, Merletti said, included the trajectory of the bullets which struck the president, indicating that it might have been thwarted had agents been stationed on the car's running boards. Other government agencies were also culpable. The FBI failed in its duty to keep Oswald under observation during the presidential visit, even though the Bureau had a file on Oswald that traces movements back to time he spent in the Soviet Union. 2 weeks before the assassination, Oswald marched to the local FBI office in Dallas and created a scene, complaining about the harassment his wife was receiving from its agents who were trying to keep track of the ex-Marine Russian defector. Kennedy's assassination had a terrible impact on agents and their families. Agent Clint Hill, who famously rescued Jacqueline Kennedy as she climbed on the trunk of the limousine after her husband was shot, sunk into a downward spiral of depression and alcoholism. In 1990, when he tried to make sense of his role in the assassination, he visited Dealey Plaza again. I walked in Dealey Plaza for a long time, he said, looking back and forth and up and down at every angle, everything possible that I could think of. How could this have been avoided? What could we have done differently? Where did we go wrong? Why did it happen? Hill firmly came to the conclusion that because of everything that happened that day, including the weather, configuration of the street, and the position of the shooter, every advantage had gone to Oswald that day. And we had none, he said. So I realized that based on all those conditions, there was nothing that I could have done. And finally, I accepted the fact that what had happened was something that I could not avoid. And so that was a great deal of relief to me. Years later, however, the 80-year-old Hill said, I wasn't thinking of my own safety. I thought, I have to shield them. In the same instant, blood, brain matter, and bone fragments exploded from the back of the president's head and splattered all over me, on my face, my clothes, my hair. The impact was like the sound of something hard hitting a melon shattering into cement. I completely failed in my responsibilities. The president was killed on my duty. Hey everyone, Scott here. One more brief word from our sponsors. Theories abound over Oswald's motivation for assassinating Kennedy. In the 1980s, Gene Davison's Oswald's Game gave readers a logical explanation. The assassin was a wannabe revolutionary who worshipped Cuba's Marxist dictator Fidel Castro. According to Davison, Oswald likely acted out of a distorted sense of political idealism. In recent years, Vincent Bugliosi's Reclaiming History examined every theory and every conspiracy claim. The former Los Angeles lawyer, who became famous for his prosecution of hippie killer Charles Manson, took the debate about conspiracy allegations a step further by providing a devastating, no-nonsense approach to the ridiculous assassination scenarios constructed by conspiracy authors, which he argues deliberately skewed the evidence in the case. His book has done a lot to marginalize JFK conspiracy theorists. 50 years after Kennedy's assassination, there hasn't been any credible evidence showing that JFK's assassination was a result of a conspiracy. Sophisticated reenactments of the assassination, using state-of-the-art technology, including computer models and laser-assisted weaponry, have shown that 3 shots were fired, all from behind and from the direction of the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, where eyewitness Howard Brennan placed Oswald at the time of the shooting. The rifle and the pistol were traced directly to Oswald. Spectrographic analysis of photographs purporting to show gunmen on a grassy knoll reveal only light and shadows. Neutron activation analyses of bullet fragments support the single bullet